For nearly 20 years, one steel tower defined Six Flags Great Adventures skyline, and that coaster was none other than the beloved Kingda Ka. Then in 2024, it quietly closed. By early 2025, it was gone entirely, frustrating a large portion of its fans. But now something new is rising in its shadow, a project tied to record-breaking promises. As we slowly gain more insight about this new coaster, we can now start to piece together what this Kingda Ka replacement might look like. And as of a few days ago, it looks like we have a name: Phantom Spire. Let's take all these clues and conceptualize Great Adventures record-breaking edition. Hello everyone, welcome back to TH Designs. Today's video is a little bit similar to our recreation series, not too dissimilar from the Son of Beast video that we just did, where we kind of have some commentary over a planet coaster build. Today we're talking about the replacement of Kingda Ka. Some people have called it Spinda Ka, some people have called it this and that. We actually have had a name dropped a few days ago, and the name appears to be Phantom Spire. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but to start off, I'm sure there's a portion of this audience that may not even know about this coaster really at all. So Kingda Ka, of course, closed in late 2024, ultimately being demolished in 2025. Extremely disappointing for many of its fans. It was done pretty secretively, but ultimately was decided because it's just kind of a maintenance nightmare, a lot of outdated systems in the coaster, and just ultimately was decided that it was best to be scrapped. So this naturally leads to the idea of a replacement. How do you replace a coaster that stood for 20 years, that was the fastest coaster in the world at one point, and was really the tallest coaster on the planet, and would have still have been even if it wasn't demolished until just this past month when Falcon's Flight opened? There's been a lot of speculation. There's very little information that is confirmed, but the idea based off of the park coming out and saying that there's going to be a 2026 edition on this site that is going to be record-breaking, multiple record-breaking. A lot of speculation is saying that this is going to be a mock tower coaster. All the evidence that's out there kind of points to that this is probably going to be the model. It is not a model that exists at all, and it's a model that has been brought up in some different guest pass holder surveys in the past, which has led a lot of the community to think that this is probably the replacement, which is what you are actually seeing being built now, is what this tower coaster would probably look like when visualized. The idea is that it's essentially a shuttle coaster, which a lot of people are disappointed in, but that is the nature of the coaster. It's a shuttle coaster that has a huge tower, which ultimately is supposed to replace that kind of iconography that Kingda Ka had. And it's going to be a mock spinning coaster, so the same type of cars that you see on like Ride to Happiness. It's a very beloved model and coaster type, so putting it at this scale is very fascinating and really interesting how it's going to go. As for the name that we kind of mentioned briefly before, there's been a trademark in the past few days. Earlier in January 2026, when this video is being made, Six Flags filed for the trademark of Phantom Spire, quote unquote. That's the name. And typically this is done for new additions for a coaster. Now, this was done by Six Flags as a whole, as a company, not specifically Great Adventures, so it is reasonable to critique and say that this may not even be for this coaster at all. But the name, to be honest, in my opinion, seems to lend itself towards a tower. So while technically it's not confirmed, technically almost none of this is confirmed. We are just basing it off of the actual Google Earth footage of the footer placements. Now, there are some really great kind of deep dives and visualizations that are already out there for this coaster. ML Design specifically did a no limits recreation that was done about a year ago with the initial evidence that was brought in speculation of this new coaster. That rendering specifically was done in a straight line and pretty much directly on top of the land that Kingda Ka sits on, which we now know in hindsight, because of the Google Earth footage that is out there, we know that this is actually a curved layout. So the triple launch and the inverted launch specifically are wrapping around the Kingda Ka layout, not built directly on top of it. Now, there's speculation. L2 Orion did a video talking about why this may have been done. The idea maybe was that Kingda Ka wanted to be around a little bit longer than it ended up being, and the construction of this could have happened while Kingda Ka was still operating. The only thing that's anywhere near the site and that really sits on it at all is the actual tower, which kind of is on more or less the same site as Kingda Ka. We'll talk more about it when we end up diving into the actual in-game file, and we can talk about the locations of everything. But speaking of location, we do have this coaster not happening where the station of Kingda Ka was. The station is actually pushed further back, about 150 meters or so, near where Green Lantern used to sit, which was a stand-up coaster that sat next to Superman, which Superman is still there, and was pretty much part of the boardwalk section of the park. That's the name of the theming, which is kind of why this name is kind of strange. Maybe there's a potential retheming of that area. We shall see. But ultimately, I think it's a really good decision because you're looking at the circulation patterns in this park. Kingda Ka sat next to El Toro, which was kind of a dead end, more or less, outside of the typical circulation that most guests take in Great Adventure. So the fact that they're doing this near Superman and near the boardwalk, I think that's a much better decision. All in all, that's kind of more or less the information that we have, and ultimately led to the rendering that you're seeing me build right now, which the role of this is pretty much to just strictly extend off of the ideas of ML Designs and putting it in that curve that we see one-to-one with the footers. I wanted to do a Google Earth floor plan that I usually do on our recreations to make sure that it's one-to-one, but that was just way too difficult because of the scale of this coaster. I mean, this coaster is huge. It almost goes without saying, which is good for a replacement of Kingda Ka. Now, there is a lot of controversy as to whether this is even an adequate successor of Kingda Ka, and if you personally ask me, I feel it's a strange choice. Will it be an awesome coaster? Yes. It's a lot like Top Thrill 2, where it probably wasn't what everybody thought at first, but it is pretty cool. It is a cool coaster. It is one of a kind. It's probably going to break even more records along with the spinning coasters, fastest inverting, whatever, all the other ones that they can come up with. It's probably going to be the tallest spike in the world. Top Thrill 2's is 420 feet. I can't imagine that they wouldn't break that record if they have the ability to. So this spike that you're actually seeing me build the tower for right now is probably going to be sitting near 425, maybe even 450 feet. Now, one of the concerns with this model type, along with just the kind of underwhelming nature of it, some people claiming that it's pretty much the bare minimum replacement for Kingda Ka, there's a lot of concerns about throughput, which makes perfect sense. And if you don't know what throughput is, basically, that's just how fast can you pump guests in and out of the ride. And a shuttle coaster, as you can imagine, is going to naturally open itself up to questions and critique. If you only have one train running at any given time, well, you know, that's half your capacity. So the station that you saw me build at the beginning is probably going to be similar to something that you see like on Mr. Freeze, where it's like a transfer track almost. So that way you have two trains and they're loading while the other one is running. And you of course can't make that in game, so I tried my best to just make two stations, and you'll just kind of have to make believe with me and pretend that it is a transfer track. Now, another interesting point that I'll bring up now before we do dive into the park is this doesn't touch Kingda Ka's land at all. You see in the time-lapse right now that Kingda Ka is still there. I didn't delete it. Like I said before, you could argue that this tower may be a little misplaced. It may be a little bit closer to the tower of Kingda Ka rather than where it currently sits. There's an idea of, is this the only replacement for Kingda Ka? I mean, you're having a pretty large portion of land here untouched, even with this coaster installed, because we did have to remove a lot of the parking lot. They're expanding even more into the parking lot, which they did with Green Lantern, which they did with Superman. I think even Kingda Ka itself was an expansion into the parking lot. So is there going to be another coaster between El Toro and Phantom Spire, assuming that's what this coaster is called? I don't know. That's up for interpretation. Some people mention Giga Coaster, this type of model, that type of models. There's a bunch out there for them to pick and choose from. So if they wanted to, I'm sure they could, and that would be really fun to see. So I think that pretty much covers most of the discussion that I wanted to bring up during the actual time lapse. I think at this point it probably makes sense to jump into the actual file and talk about how this coaster shapes up. So let's jump over and I will see you then. So here we are in game with plenty to look at. There were a lot of details added that were not in the time lapse, so there is some new content for you to take a look at. Of course, maybe the most noticeable one is that Kingda Ka is removed, and that this is probably what this coaster will look like more or less. I left some of the path there that you can see from where Kingda Ka would have been. Of course, the station would have been about here, and the tower would have been adjacent there, as we saw in the time lapse. But currently, this tower stands alone. You can actually see the coaster right there going down the tower. It's worth mentioning pretty much immediately that the color scheme that you see, the actual tower design, even the track layout and like the spiral of the tower, these are all interpretation. These may not be exactly how it looks. Pretty much the only thing that we know for sure is that the layout is going to be kind of bent at like a 45-degree angle, which is what I was talking about. The original reasonable assumptions with this model is that it was going to be on the plot of land of Kingda Ka and be a straight line, which makes perfect sense. But with the current footer placements, we know that the station is about 100 150 meters southwest of the Kingda Ka station. You have this straight launch, which whether or not it's a straight launch or whether or not it's going to have an airtime hill or anything in it, that's another form of interpretation. I would love to actually see something like that. Then it jumps up into that inverting stall, which has that second launch of the 3, which as far as I know is a one-of-a-kind element. I don't think an inverted launch exists on any coaster in the world, but I may be wrong. That's an extremely cool element. And then it dives down into the third and final one, which ultimately pushes it past that 100-mile-per-hour mark to have it scale up the tower here. This was heavily inspired by ML Design's rendering and their videos, so if you want to go see that video, I totally recommend that you see it and subscribe. They do some fantastic work. Now, as you see the coaster coming up now, it is a spinning coaster. I mean, like, let's not forget that. So this coaster layout is insane on its own. But when you think about the fact that you're spinning while on this coaster, it's pretty nuts. So while I have my doubts that this is a proper replacement for Kingda Ka, it is going to be pretty neat. Now, as for the actual Planet Coaster recreation itself, talking specifically about the game here, this coaster is using actually the raid track with the replacement of the spinning coaster trains, and then I covered up that track with the mock spinning track. But if I delete that, you can see that original track there, which is what you saw in the time lapse. So if you were wondering why I was building with that type, that's what the plan was. It's a technique I've been using a lot in my videos lately without really meaning to. It just kind of has been happening, but it looks pretty good. And the reason that was done is because the mock model, whether you use the hyper coaster model or the spinning coaster model, that triangular mock type, they do not have access to that dual synchronous launch, which is important not for the way up but for the way back down. Because if you replace these launches with strictly these ones, these only forward going ones that those 2 arrows are, and you don't use these dual synchronous launch track types, then when it comes back, it essentially acts as like ultra brakes, and the coaster does not complete the layout on the way back. So kind of like switching in and out between those 2 different track types. Kind of a weird little quirk that I had to work around. It kind of made this recreation a little bit more difficult than you probably would anticipate. I cannot wait for the day that they allow you to just switch the track type, but for now, this will have to do. But that second launch just looks so fun, and yeah, this thing is crazy. So I'll conclude this video by saying that a lot of this is speculation, a lot of this is just for fun visualization of the information that we have. So I hope it is something like this. Of course, as usual, this will be on the workshop for you to explore if you would like to. That's always in the description. I'll probably end up doing a cinematic just because of like the sheer scale of this thing, maybe. But we will definitely have a POV, so you will be able to experience the ride for yourself, both with and without the spinning. So if you want to feel nauseous, there's one for you, and if you don't, there's also a POV for you. So anyway, I want to hear y'all's thoughts on this coaster. Do you feel that this is an ideal replacement for Kingda Ka? Do you feel that it's going to be the only replacement for Kingda Ka, or do you think the actual land that Kingda Ka sat on is going to be another coaster at some point? Do let me know in the comments. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say, and there will be a Wheel of Wonders video coming out soon, so keep an eye out for that. And with all those things said, I think we're about done here, so do take care, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.